at the graduate school getting my doctorate and being a Fulbright scholar and #1 in my class. Because of an interracial marriage, they told me that at best I could get a job teaching composition at a military academy. At which point I got up and walked out and said, I'm applying here because if we got to fight for the values the humanities celebrate, I'm not going to be an amateur, I'm going to be a pro. And that's why I came here. And this was a law school that honored that and respected that. And so when my wife and I wrote an article that spoke to the injustices that we had seen, it was published here because, and my father wrote me, he said, I've never seen a law review article like that, but in my house there's room for many mansions. And we were asked by the articles editor of the Yale Law Journal, how do we choose to footnote and document the statement that poverty entailed deprivation of dignity? And I think I counted 17 obscenities that Gene used, and I said, forget it, I'll just write a speech for the, I'll write a speech for the Attorney General, and we'll use that as a footnote. So we've had our own saga. And legal services itself has been subjected to retaliation for daring to, so that lawyers representing the poor and using federal funds cannot bring a class action and cannot engage in something obscene called community organizing, apparently, because that might bring them into contact with human beings. And so there are a series of retaliatory actions that have been taken against legal service lawyers. But the fact that there is now a stream of people coming out of law schools who commit themselves to the purpose of advancing justice, part of that is in place. But I do have just a story to share with you, which is that when we first wrote the article, I was in the Department of Justice, and I was both special assistant and a speechwriter for Robert Kennedy. And all of his deputies said, critiquing the war on poverty by saying that the poor needed a voice, and they needed a voice that could be protected against retaliation, because there are plenty of advocates for the poor, but they get fired and they get penalized. But lawyers representing the poor presumably are performing a constitutionally protected free speech and other functions, and would not be subject to retaliation. And when we wrote that article called "The War on Poverty: A Civilian Perspective" that Ralph mentioned, I was told that I couldn't stay at the Department of Justice in Kennedy's shop attacking Johnson. And I said, well, I hear you. And then I went into Robert Kennedy's office and I gave him the article, and he said, I think I need to pass this article along to my brother-in-law, Sergeant Schreiber, who had just headed the Peace Corps and was now heading the War on Poverty, and he sent it over to him. And he asked me, it sort of changed his whole mind and his whole view of what needed to be done. And he said, could he first take me on loan and then could he hire me? And I said, yes, but only if you make this the first official publication of the War on Poverty. And he said, I'll do it. And so we have here, it was reprinted extensively by the government printing office. But then 2 years later, characteristically, I wrote an attack on legal services saying we're doing a good job delivering justice retail, but what about structural injustice wholesale? Are we deflecting attention from structural injustice? And that's been the journey that I've been on. So I would ask you, first of all, are you talking about what injustice and what justice means? Are we looking in the law school at our own system? I don't know, and I've written this in a letter to every student, every person taking the LSAT, I don't know of a lawyer who can afford a lawyer. What does that say about our system of justice, okay? And what does it mean if we're supposed to obey the law, but we can't understand it, and we can't comprehend it, and we can't get access to legal redress? And what are the systems of justice that we need? The second thing I wanted to ask you is, I don't know of a law school other than my own that is teaching a course in system change. We teach you how to litigate, we teach you how to represent individuals and even classes, but I don't know of a single public system that is not broken or failing in some way. The education system, for as long as I've been around, has been losing between a third and a half of minority students, of students of color, in every major urban center. The juvenile justice system, when it sends kids away to training schools, has a rate of 70% recidivism. I see who gets put in foster care, and it is disproportionately children of color, whereas white families get family support. Children of color get charged with neglect and abuse for a variety of things, which are usually poverty-related. When you talk about our, quote, correctional system, that's got about a 70% return within 3 years for folks who come out of prison. Urban renewal was called Negro removal. I'm not, this is no news. So our healthcare system, I don't really need to talk about, right? But we know there are some problems here, and we know that we're not doing too well on even an international level, even if we're spending more per person than any country in the world, or we're not doing too well in terms of basic health. Being all of the capacity, we have devalued in our monetary system every value that enabled our species to survive. Coming to each other's rescue, comforting each other, hugging each other, congratulating each other, talking to each other, listening to each other. These, you do not require a PhD to do these things. We know how to do them. As a species, we know how to learn from those who came before us. And yet we have devalued all of those things unless we can make them scarce by rationing, by credentialing. And so I'm simply saying that we need to begin thinking beyond entitlements that honor people who are the victims of circumstances beyond their control, and understand that every human being has something to offer and every human being has something to contribute, and we need to find a way to begin to honor those contributions. We need to go beyond legal representation to what I call the co-production of justice. I keep hearing of major court decisions which have not been implemented. The Olmstead decision is one which says you shouldn't put people in nursing homes simply because they have a disability. They're entitled to in-home services. But I can't find many states who are implementing it, and they're not implementing it in ways that will work, because they're dealing clearly with the formal system. I met with the Commissioner of Aging 3 days ago in Richmond, Virginia, who dealt with aging and disability in Virginia. His official state plan says that he gets $500 million to deal with aging and disability. But then there's a little section that talks about the unpaid care that in fact keeps people out of nursing homes, provided by family and kinfolk. Do you know how much they valued that at? $10 billion. $10 billion compared with the $500 million, and nobody looks at how one promotes and supports and honors and values the informal care system. In case you hadn't noticed, there's an economy that we don't study here in law school that nobody looks at. It's called family, neighborhood, community, civil society. Doesn't do much of importance. It just raises children, takes care of the elderly, holds officials accountable, maybe keeps the planet sustainable, maybe fights for social justice, but nothing important, you understand. And learn and use their knowledge to make, and God forbid, wise decisions. So maybe we've got, in fact, a reserve of people, not just the young people who are coming up, who I think are idealistic and want to make a difference, but we've got baby boomers who will constitute about a fourth, or at least about a fourth of the voting population, and maybe we can begin to make less insane decisions politically and get away from some of the polarization which has so paralyzed the whole democratic process. We have to go beyond representation and legal delivery of justice to co-production. What the hell do I mean by co-production of justice? I'll tell you what I meant in one case when I noticed that 54% of all African American males in Washington, D.C. were either in prison, parole, probation, or a warrant was out for their arrest. I congratulated the chief judge and said, you're really running an efficient delivery system to the adult correctional system in your so-called juvenile justice system, because those over 18 had not committed their first offense at 18. And so we were just sending them away to training schools where we get a guaranteed recidivism rate of 70%. So he said, all right, Edgar, what do you propose to do? And I said, well, I've made this breakthrough discovery I want to share with you. He said, what's that? I said, kids don't listen to adults. I know I'm the first person to discover that, but I just wanted to share that, and maybe we need some help from the teenagers. So we set up in Washington, D.C. a youth court where teenagers are the jurors, and where teenagers listen, get kids who have been involved in the misdemeanors that, which included drugs, which included the kinds of fights they get into in school and after school, which included trespass and destruction of property and stealing cars and that kind of stuff. And those teenagers listen to those kids. They sentence them to community service and to restitution and to an apology, but they also sentence them to jury duty. That's really hard, because that means for 10 Saturdays they have to actually get up in the morning and show up at court. And that's, you talk about punishment, that's real punishment to get up Saturday mornings. And they've reduced recidivism to 6%. These are the bad kids. The bad kids as jurors are doing more for the rule of law than my law students are in Washington, D.C.